Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 178, Plagiarism. Now we are reaching the end, the conclusion of our research integrity series, but I did make that decision to separate out plagiarism and self-plagiarism. Rare for me to do this sort of stuff, but I am self-plagiarism. I have separated them out. And basically, it's like separating out a discussion of the Second World War and a discussion of the zombie apocalypse. The Second World War is an actual thing that happened. And no matter how much I would love zombies to exist, and dragons and wizards, sadly they do not. So I did want to spend some quality time talking about plagiarism in the context of research integrity rather than academic integrity. So look at plagiarism within the context of research misconduct and research integrity. It's a big and important topic. And then I have an opportunity to go the full screaming zombie apocalypse in the next vlog. But this is a legitimate conversation that we're having this week. Next week is a lot of fun, a lot of weirdness, but also some much bigger points and conversations to be had. Okay. So, as we know, plagiarism is a big deal in learning and teaching. It's a big deal in research. It's an incredibly important deal in our universities and the stakeholders we are meant to serve. Every milestone that you do for us in a higher degree program at Flinders University asks, nay demands, that you do a plagiarism check and that your supervisor verifies that you understand what is note-taking, what is citation, what is paraphrasing, and yes, what is plagiarism. And of course, at the end, your thesis is run through text matching software. So when you submit your thesis, one of the tasks you do at that point of submission is run it through Turnitin. And then your supervisor actually signs off that you have maintained research integrity and that plagiarism is not present. So this is a really important gig. And then and you might not know this, but then I go through as Dean every single thesis that is submitted. And yes, I look at what the software is telling me. I look at the Turnitin report, but I actually go through every line of every thesis that is submitted at this university and is about to go out. And look, it's a dark art, plagiarism. It's not about the Turnitin number actually at all. And as I've gone through hundreds, probably thousands of reports at this point, you know what, I used to sort of think the number was a bit silly and a bit pointless and not really the story, and now I know it's the case. Now, I do this. I go through every Turnitin report and I go through your thesis because the worst thing that can happen in a PhD or research master's examination is a claim of plagiarism from an examiner. If and when that occurs, the entire examination process is stopped, and until the plagiarism matter is discharged, the examination process does not continue. So we talk a lot about deal breakers. I talk a lot about deal breakers. Wow, my goodness me, this is the one. And yes, in my experience, examiners have found self-plagiarism from a student who had submitted an article in a journal and then put that into their thesis, and the examiner called that self-plagiarism. We'll talk about that again next week. And a student did get pinged, I'll use the word ping, try and find a verb, did get pinged when the caption on photographs and graphs was not properly cited. So it was taken from a source, it was not in inverted commas, so plagiarism was logged on the captions to photographs. Wow. So as you can see, this is a pretty difficult, messy and convoluted space. It's also linked in with our authorship discussion last week, and as you can see, a bit of shame, a bit of blame, a bit of embarrassment and a lot of fear punctuates our discussions of plagiarism. So really, self-plagiarism only adds incredible complexity and weirdness to an already complex and weird issue. Let me explain, and this is a fascinating example. My head exploded when I found this case study for you this week. So in the editorial, that is volume 70, number 4 of the Gerontological Society of America editorial this year, and I'm recording this in 2019, the editor, Anna Newman, had to do something rather remarkable in her editorial. She reported a retraction of an article in the journal that was published in the March 2019 edition, and that paper was on chronic inflammation. The article was withdrawn because it had used patch writing. That is, basically grasping whole sections of other articles and putting them together like a patchwork, and just taking other earlier researchers' work, including their citations, and just punching these articles together. The author was, and I wish I was making this up, I had to check it on multiple occasions because I thought it was a joke, but the author, Bertrand Forgere, as in forgerer, F-O-U-G-E-R-E, Forgere, wow, did this. What he did was he gathered up paragraphs from about 13 other articles and took their references with them and put it together in a new piece. Now, what's amazing is the journal's software picked up Forgere's self-plagiarism. So it found bits of work that he'd used from an earlier article and said, that's way too close. You need to paraphrase that a little bit more carefully. So he did that. But the software missed the other 13 articles where he'd taken entire paragraphs and their references. So as you can see, self-plagiarism is the least thing to worry about in this article. And indeed, the editor's comments were pretty desperately trying to confirm the integrity of the journal. The reputation of the journal was solid. The reputation of the editorial board was sound. But she also used the phrase, quote, "It's becoming increasingly difficult to judge the quality of information with the large number of media outlets." End of quote. Really? Now, I know I'm a bit biased. You know, I wrote a book called Digital Dieting about how we create intellectual fitness from an information obese environment. But I think what we do learn from a case such as this, which has just happened literally in the last 4 weeks, is that plagiarism damages reputations. It damages the reputation of a journal, of individual scholars, obviously, and really of knowledge. And all sorts of words and phrases are being used right now, obviously cutting and pasting, but this patching thing is really interesting, and the new phrase mosaic as well. And all sorts of services now allow us, through software, through interface management, to locate plagiarism, to find text recycling, as it's called. So while we are reliant on software, we're forgetting about the value of wetware, our information literacy skills. And in a time when supposedly Turnitin solves all our problems, we're ignoring the information literacy skills and our role, our responsibility to be involved in this process. So Anne Newman, the editor of this journal, could only make the slightly self-evident and pretty damn embarrassing comment, quote, "With increasing reliance on electronic media, it's common for people to take notes using a cut and paste technique. It's very difficult to keep track of original writing versus copied writing." End of quote. This statement was made by a professor in a graduate school, a professor of public health at Pittsburgh University, great university. Now let's be honest, it's not difficult to keep track of your reading, your researching, your note-taking, your writing. These are simple, these are basic tasks that we teach first-year undergraduate students. So let's put in place some definition, some energy to this word plagiarism within the research environment to try and understand what's going on. So I'm going to put in place a definition, then I'm going to offer you 10 of my very, very quick tips to avoid plagiarism in the research environment. Important. So the first thing we need to grasp is Plagiarism is not one thing, team. It has a history, it has a context, it also has a geography. The meaning of plagiarism changes through time, and it does also alter from place to place. So it is an historical term, and it has a lot of stakeholders that are invested in it. So yes, researchers, PhD students, journals, universities, huge. The definition that has the most traction, the consensual definition that exists at the moment, is the use of material without appropriate citation. And mostly this material refers to written material. But where this discussion is going to be interesting in the next 2 to 3 years, I think, is the role of artwork, figures, graphs, and how they're used within a text in terms of citation. So plagiarized material can emerge in published and in unpublished sources. Really challenging series of debates around the unpublished sources too. But where it becomes really messy is at what point does paraphrasing become plagiarism? And I've been reading so many really fascinating, complicated articles this week about this area, and it's just, wow, it's energetic. So are 4 words that are used from a sentence from a paraphrase. So if you use 4 words from the original, is that actually plagiarism? Some research articles say it is. But if a student dances too closely around an original text, then the paraphrasing and the plagiarism, they do start to conflate. And that's a really, really dangerous pathway. Wow. And as I said, it's historical. These debates are changing all the time. And also, what is the appropriate amount of material you can use, even if you're citing that source? So is there a limitation to the material you can use? Yes, there is. And that limitation comes through copyright law. So even with the best will in the world, you've put inverted commas in, you've put the reference in, you may still be pinged, not necessarily for plagiarism, but for a copyright breach. Okay. So as you can see, this is about ethics. This is about law, and it is about information literacy. So let me now offer 10 quick tips that might just provide a penny's drop moment for you to enable your career in this incredibly volatile area. So 1, take notes. Do not cut and paste. It's never been easier to locate text-based plagiarism. Guys, you whack a bit of software in, thanks for playing, you're done, you're cooked. Now, I've done an earlier vlog on note-taking, and I've had some fantastic feedback from that. That was a very early one, I think. But so if you're interested in the sort of full thing about note-taking, there is a vlog on that. But what I would say to you right now is that note-taking is the very foundation of research. It's everything. You do not have research without note-taking. But at its most basic, it is about logging and organising ideas. So as you know, on my hard drive of my computer, I have hundreds upon hundreds of files that are organising my notes, and they have topics like zombies, obviously, creative industries, neoliberalism, plagiarism, for example. So pick a topic, and I have my notes right back to my master's degree in 1992. So I've moved the notes between all the computers ever since that time. So I can basically pick any topic, and I've probably got some notes on it. I never cut and paste. I never cut and paste. I tell you what I do. I separate what I'm reading from how I'm taking notes. So I enact interface management. So if I've got paper-based articles, here's my computer, there's paper-based articles, or I have the book that's separate. So I'm taking notes while I'm reading the book. Or indeed, if I'm using my Kindle books, there it is off my iPad. So there are my electronic books, my ebooks, and I'm taking notes on my computer. So this is interface management. I'm separating out where I'm reading, what I'm reading, where I'm reading, and where I'm taking notes. So cutting and pasting is not possible. Really important. So I separate out my information source and my notes so that cutting and pasting is not even an option for me. So what happens because of that is in real time, I have to make decisions about information. So I quote when I need to quote, so all how that's been presented is really good. I'm going to do a quote there, that's great. Taking notes, make sure that I'm paraphrasing on the way through rather than taking the direct text. But then I'm also very clear about tracking the pathway of information. So right, that idea has come from that source. When I then offer my interpretation in my notes as I'm reading, I often do three little asterisks and say my interpretation and write my interpretation. Then I put little asterisks at the end of it and continue taking my notes. So in real time, that's what information literacy is. Taking notes, understanding information, and then offering your interpretation and understanding the difference. Boom. 2, paraphrase with care. I worry about paraphrasing a lot. It's a very important skill. It's also an incredibly delicate skill. But the one thing I'd say is you improve your paraphrasing by paraphrasing. So practice does make it work. But there's also other scaffolding skills that you can use, like developing your vocabulary. So if you need to find alternative words that might actually be more precise than the original, then if you have a wide vocabulary, you're able to do that work. And so I enjoy the thrill of learning new words every single day. That's what learning is about. And also try to understand the context of your discipline and the specialist words and ideas that are used within it. So what happens is, the skill I think with paraphrasing is the capacity to bounce from a person's idea, and that's a great idea, must log that, that's a reference. That person has developed that, rock and roll, brilliant, to then bounce it to your interpretation. And the best, I think, writers, the best researchers can do that really, really well with skill. So that's that person's, that's terrific. And then I'm able to develop something new and innovative and log that. So that's the way to move from paraphrasing into your original research. It's very important that you nail down the differences between that person's work and your interpretation. 3, use the software that is available to you. Don't be frightened by text matching software like Turnitin. What I'd say is use it early, use it often, and use it in draft mode to assess your drafts. Don't use it as the sledgehammer penalty at the end. We go, oh, I'm really frightened. What's the result? What's it going to say? Use it as a diagnostic tool throughout your candidature and beyond. See what your note-taking or your writing challenges are. What's the software telling you? And then print out that report and show it to our librarian colleagues, show it to me, show it to people working with academic literacies, and say, look, I'm having a problem here. What is that problem? Can you help me work it out? So use it as a diagnostic tool. 4, beware the plagiarism of ideas. This is the most insidious form of plagiarism. And it is, I would argue, the most damaging to early career researchers and PhD students in particular. So, an academic attends a weekly seminar, might look at a poster, go to a conference, see an early career researcher deliver a presentation, and then they return and they enact the identical experiment or scaffold their research to basically operate in that area, whatever the discipline may be, and publishes that, noting that there are certain journals that have a very, very quick turnaround of ideas these days. Now, this is plagiarism of ideas, and it's almost impossible to prove. But I have a solution, and I've used this with all my students. Hi Ros, used it with all my students, used it with myself, and I used it with my late wonderful husband, Professor Steve Redhead. We used it for his Theoretical Times book in particular. So what I do is when something new and innovative and edgy is happening, and perhaps it's going to be some time before it's published, right? I record a podcast and make that open access, freely available. And so what I've done is I've captured those ideas sonically, and say publications are coming and so forth, but that's then loaded up online. There's a URL, it's dated, it's used keywords, it's got a description, and indeed it can be cited. So for my PhD students, when they're developing these really innovative ideas, I capture it with a podcast early in the research, and that therefore lessens the chance of the plagiarism of ideas. 5. Oh, this is the weird one. I learned a lot about this in the last month. Beware patchwork or mosaic plagiarism. Okay, now I knew this was a thing before I knew this is what it was called or labelled, right? And I'll try and explain it, and I hope this never ever happens to you, but when I was a very young academic, I read an article, because I'm interested, and I often write the first article in some areas. The nature of being a popular culture person is you are able to, oh, that's brand new, that's edgy, attach it to those ideas, on you go. So I've written the first article on a whole series of different topics. But therefore I was reading an article on this topic after I published in it to keep up to date with the field, and I started to recognise my own work. Don't know if you've ever had this happen to you. It was a horrifying moment, and the paraphrasing was so close, and some of my phrases were used, and I have a very specific way of writing. You can pick my writing a mile off. I was like, oh, and then after I'd read 3 pages going, this is my stuff, magically there was a little Harvard bracketed reference at the end of the 3 pages saying Brabazon, 2001, end of bracket. So the citation was there. The paraphrasing was poor, and it was my research that was presented for 3 pages and then, presented, moved on with the rest of the article. So this type of behaviour, I just went, that's just dreadful. That's called patchwork or mosaic paraphrasing. So you're not taking from one source, but multiple sources, and when you create those multiple patches, you create a patchwork quilt, a new whole fabric. But no, if you are lifting work from other people, it doesn't matter if it's 1 person or 15 people. This is patchwork plagiarism. So take good notes. That's somebody's idea, great, take good notes and then develop your interpretation from it and really log those differences. Okay, 6. Check your references. One of the causes of plagiarism is laziness, and I'm being cruel there because I understand it is really tough to write an article. It is exhausting, and after you've done it all, and I know that feeling, it's like, wow, it's finished. And the last thing you want to do is then go back into it and check all the quotations, check the bibliography, make sure it's all working. That's the last thing you want to do. But do it. Please check those references, check the citation, check the quotations if you use them, and make sure that your original work is demonstrated and that the intellectual scaffold that you deployed to get to that original idea is really clearly articulated. Cool. 7. I know this is a controversial one, people are going to be screaming at me. Use quotation marks. Now I know in some disciplines quotation marks are not encouraged. So people say, well, in this discipline I won't know. We don't do that. We don't do that. Well, you know what? You should. You should. And I'm not too bothered about the discipline. It's interdisciplinary. Plagiarism is historical and changing, and therefore how we cite and deploy references should also change. So if you're not going to do the careful work required for paraphrasing, and your researcher has deployed a remarkable turn of phrase, then feel very comfortable in putting that phrase in inverted commas. So therefore that's a direct quotation, and I would argue information knowledge transcends all disciplines. So start to use the techniques that suit your project at this particular time. And please, if you quote, use inverted commas or indent the quotation. So I've heard people say, oh look, that's a quote. And it's like, oh, I put a quote in Tara. Dude, you haven't put inverted commas around it. It's not a quote until you've done that, you'll be pinged. So do feel free. If something is remarkable and how it is expressed is beautiful, I don't care about the discipline, use it as a quotation. Okay, 8, my favourite. Use explanatory footnotes. Use explanatory footnotes. I'm a big believer in the explanatory footnote. This is the big footnote that provides evidence for a particular point that you're making. And this is particularly valuable in a plagiarism discussion. So say, for example, you're making a big point about a consensual argument in your discipline. So, we've now reached a point, and this is the definition of subculture, pick something, often it's conceptual. So the discipline is now saying this is what this is, right? Now, at that point, I often place a big explanatory footnote stating that this research, these ideas have been developed from a series of scholars, and I list the most significant ones. So I make the point that yes, I'm making this argument in this context, but the scaffold has been deployed to enable a whole series of new ideas in this area, and so you're being intellectually generous. Here are these great scholars that have got me here, but you're also protecting yourself. So here's a consensual point, but that consensual point has been formed from great scholars. So list the great scholars. 9. Remember that you are responsible for all the work in an article, including the work of your co-authors. Saying, I didn't write that section, is not going to wash if plagiarism is found in that section that you did not write. When you are an author, you sign off that you are responsible for the entire piece. So when I'm writing with other people, and I'll be drafting that wonderful book with Nat and Tiffany actually on Sunday, I'm recording this on a Friday, and so what I'm doing is I'm drafting the whole piece. Drafting all of it, making it all fit together, and then I'm going to give it to Tiffany and to Nat to then draft their entire piece too. Then while they're doing that, I'm putting it through Turnitin. Not because I think anything weird's occurred, but let's have a look and then we'll discuss it as a group to see what we find, okay? Because I didn't write their sections, so I just want to make sure everything's cool. We've all edited it. We agree with everything that each of us has said, and I've then done this verification. So if there's any problems, we'll start to see it. So remember, co-authorship is not a pass. 10. Use plagiarism discussions like this to explore the idea of authorship. Now, I always try and finish with a meta point in these vlogs. Plagiarism asks us to explore who we are as researchers and how we claim authority with what we research. And if we include other people in the writing of our articles and they have no idea what's going on in that piece, then they're actually not an author. Okay, and that's the point, because yes, there is this incredible responsibility that comes with authorship. There is a responsibility for the content, there is a responsibility for the form in which that content is expressed. So if you don't know that something is plagiarized, it could be plagiarized because you haven't checked, then you don't really deserve to be called an author. Being an author is about responsibility as well. So if you don't know what other people have done in this article, then you are opening yourself up to a chance for getting pinged for plagiarism. So you need to check, you need to verify, you need to confirm. Now I know a lot of people go, well, this is really boring, this is just research administration, this is nonsense. Tell you what I've learnt through my very, very long career at this point, and that is research administration is crucial. You might think, oh, look, the research is all. Actually, ensuring that everything is framed correctly, signed correctly, is organised, there's an honesty and integrity there. That's research administration. And you know what? That's crucial. That's everything. So make sure that when we're all talking about the rights of authorship, and a lot of PhD students do, I have the right of authorship, and that we also talk about the responsibilities of authorship. Remember that authorship is about an acknowledgement, it's about a disclosure, confirming these ideas I've developed and those ideas over there I haven't, and because I haven't, I've cited them effectively. So be clear about that differentiation and use referencing to confirm it. Okay, so plagiarism is a warning to us. But like all warnings, it's incredibly productive because it asks that we reflect upon our practice and our process. And we start to think deeply about the truths and the normalities that we take for granted. I often describe plagiarism as a lighthouse in academic life. It warns us to stay away and set a new and different course. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.